Like and follow if you love horror. Anyone want to talk about the anomalous elephant in the room? Casey hissed through pain. Where was the damn blood in that bag? Besides the hole, it's spotless. People continued to look around nervously. Top to bottom, front to back, this whole damn lab, I repeated. I'll help Casey get to medical once I'm done with these bandages. And I want that little furball split in two and on a dissection table before I get back. Actually, about that, Sergeant Nunez interrupted. I was sent by General Malak to escort you directly to medical. Top priority. This statement shocked me. While the circumstances were already unusual, I hadn't considered that they could all be connected. Now I couldn't help but immediately correlate the fact that this rat had attacked two people. Moments later, gunfire started, and now the top brass was summoning me to medical. At the time, I felt the connection I was making were no less than ridiculous than Casey's usual tinfoil hat nonsense. I brushed them off and chalked it up as nerves, though part of me wanted to throw Casey in cuffs and whisk him off to quarantine isolation. I felt so paranoid and foolish even thinking it at the time. We loaded Casey into a little security cart Nunez had arrived in and headed directly to medical. On the way, I pressed Nunez for anything to help me understand the situation. Was the contaminant of the gray zone identified? I asked. Unknown, ma'am, Nunez replied. Is this request coming concerning the gray zone? I continued. Unknown, Nunez repeated. I have an injured man, possibly from the same rat that recently injured Corporal Weedy. If there is any link to the two incidences, I need to be made aware. I was becoming increasingly annoyed as the conversation continued. It's above my pay grade, ma'am. Nunez shook his head. Fucking typical. For all we know, the Russians deployed super rabies into the gray zone, and they didn't have the common decency to tell me how long I've got before I start biting. Casey chuckled nervously, still hissing through pain. Don't be ridiculous. There's nothing inherent to the DNA sequencing of rabies that would cause the mass desiccation of plants. I really wanted to put his mind at ease, but even my mind was awash with concerns. At the moment, across the base, we could hear gunfire again. Nunez was cool as a cucumber, but even he shot a sideways glance at me and Casey. I couldn't help but think the gray zone's placement was no accident, though the idea of an attack felt like paranoia giving the parameters. It was something I couldn't just rule out. It was even part of my job to explore and identify the possibility. When we arrived at medical, General Malak was already there. There were a few people in the world that intimidated me as much. She looked like she was carved out of marble and had a 1,000-yard stare that could pierce you to the core. Nunez saluted. As you were, the general stated firmly. Her words ran shivers up my spine. She wasn't my type, but damn, she had an air about her. Her voice was warm, penetrating, and commanding. That, and a black woman doesn't work her way to the position of general without being tough as pig iron. Miss Winters, we have a situation of unnatural origins. I also don't believe in coincidence, and I find it decidedly difficult to rule out the gray zone as having something to do with this. What I initially considered as silly fears were coming out of the general's mouth as though they were the most logical concerns. These things I considered the fancies of fools in tinfoil hats now seemed completely reasonable as they were addressed in all seriousness by the general. I tried not to let my anxiety bias my opinion. In what way do you believe them connected? There were missing pieces of the puzzle I desperately needed to know. I wasn't completely out of my mind. As we walked, a pack of guard dogs began to lunge and snarl at Casey. This was unlike them. Even the most vicious war dog fawned as playful as puppies for Casey, the hippie environmentalist. Recently, guards from the West Gate was brought with bite wounds to his hands, she explained, saying things that shook me to my core. About 20 minutes later, staff found medical team dead. The guard was then found attempted to enter a restricted area. When he was stopped, he assaulted and killed 2 other guards. He was eventually restrained and placed into custody where he's being observed. The other gunfire? I asked, my concerns deepened. Nearby, the dogs were going absolutely apeshit, pulling and straining to get at Casey. Similar incidents with other guards. One who was gunned down in a firefight. All three men are quarantined and locked down, exhibiting unusual behaviors. General Malak. I must have sounded like a frightened school toddler. My environmentalist biologist was bitten by the same. She must have known the word that followed was rat. She pushed past me, nearly knocking me over, then drew her sidearm and aimed it at Casey. At the time, Nunez was not far behind us, assisting Casey walk. Sergeant Nunez, restrain that man this instant, she barked. Whoa! Casey blurted out, throwing both of his hands up. The guard dogs continued to snap and snarl at Casey while he was surrounded by soldiers. I protested that he was injured and needed immediate medical assistance. This fell on deaf ears as Nunez pushed away, drew his gun, and ordered Casey to his knees. Before he could comply, Casey made a noise unlike anything I've ever heard. It was a mixture of panic and agony as his leg began to churn unnaturally. Within seconds, he let loose a shrill scream and clutched his leg. The guards around him threatened to shoot, unsure of how else to respond. Then, blood stained his clothing as flesh and sinew slid out of his pant leg in pooling glob of crimson jelly. The leg from the foot to his mid-waist just liquefied and pulled away from his body, taking only mere seconds. His organs spilled out from the gaping cavity in his waist, and he collapsed to the ground, his body decompressing as his belly and chest deflated. Then he gurgled out his last breath. The gelatinous mixture of writhing parts quickly slithered away from him, heading directly for the general. When she opened fire on it, the rest of the guards followed suit. After a few rounds of bullets, the mass simply couldn't hold its form and completely liquefied. That's new, the general said, matter of fact, and holstered her gun. I don't care if you have to repurpose a wet vac. Every ounce of that thing gets contained, she barked as guards scattered, then turned to me. Follow me. We proceeded into medical, where the whole floor layout had been changed. A wall was just gone. The separate beds and vanity curtains all removed. Most of the equipment was cleared out, and the large pieces in the process of being dismantled. In the center of medical was a glass box, no larger than 8 by 8. Within the box stood 3 men, and when we approached, they all immediately moved to face us and just stood there, staring at the general. I thought you said you fatally shot one. The first words out of my mouth might have made me sound like a dullard, but before General could respond, they all spoke. I thought you said you finally shot one, they parroted in unison. That is also new. General Malak rested her fist against her jaw, tapping lightly in contemplation. That is also new, they parroted again. The general moved away from the glass and towards the edge of the room, off in the shadows. I need hypothesis, and quick. The bodies of the dead medical staff have already gone missing. She leaned in close to me. I was admittedly distracted by everything that had happened up to that point. I just watched the horrific death of a comrade, and everything I was dealing with that sounded like absolute lunacy. My mind reeled and I struggled to think clearly. I felt like I could vomit or pass out. Only now was the reality of everything finally starting to set in. But within moments my head cleared and all the puzzle pieces quickly fell together. The gray zone, the lack of living creatures, the trail leading up to the west guard post, the rat at the guard post that attacked both Casey and Corporal Weedy. The fact that nothing stayed dead. This is an invasion, I blurted out, sounding like a goddamn toddler. A viral agent like a nanite was deployed at the edge of our facility. It must have had difficulty propagating at first, dissolving only the smallest creatures as the larger ones fled. Fungi, bacterium, viruses, insects, any organic matter the agent could consume. It tried to proliferate using the plant matter, but either couldn't or simply couldn't do it effectively, leaving the desiccated husks. After running out of organic matter to propagate, it must have made a desperate run for the guard post, connecting with the first complex organism. It only managed to infect the rat, likely because it was sheltered enough not to see it coming. The rat bites Corporal Weedy, then Casey. It completely takes over Weedy, but doesn't have the chance to fully take over Casey. We surrounded it. It panicked.